If you have your Bibles, turn to Job chapter 2. In just a moment, we'll be reading verses 11 through 13. Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13. I would be amiss if I did not join Chris in thanking you so much for inviting us to come and be a part of this. We've never done it in one day. We've done it next week we're going to be in Corinth, Mississippi, and we're doing it Friday night, Saturday, and then Sunday. Sometimes we've done just Saturdays and Sundays, but not one day. But we really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope it's not been too hard for you. As Ron says, the mind can attain only what the seat can endure. So we'll try to keep that in mind in regards to this session here. But this is the most practical session. This is where we talk about things that people have said. These were the things that helped them in those first few hours, first few days to go and deal with their grief. In Job chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, we read, "Now when Job's three friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great." I meant to say this earlier, but if you're ever in Florence, Alabama, we would love to have you come by and visit with us at North Alabama Christian Children's Home. We take care of children of the state who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected, and we'd love to have opportunity to show you around. And then there's a barbecue place about 8 minutes away. I'll be glad to take you there as well. So if you're ever in Florence, we're out in the country going on 43 toward the Tennessee line. We'd love to have you come and see us. Ron would be glad to have you in Huntsville, Alabama. And for those who have been watching online, we are grateful for your willingness to be a part of this. And if there's a question that you have, feel free to email us, and we'd be more than glad to pass that on. What can we do to help people in their grief journey? Nothing is as important as your presence. We said that from the outset, and it's still the case. Here in Job's story, Job had these three friends. Later on, they're going to point the finger at him and said, surely you had to do something wrong. But first of all, they came and they saw that they did not recognize him. Grief changes the way we look. A lot of times people will lose weight. Sometimes people gain weight. It can cause you to have changes. It affects your immune system. All kinds of things that's to the point that they didn't recognize him. Remember that he had lost 10 children, his entire heritage. He had lost his health, bottom of his foot to the top of his head. He'd lost his wife, who had said, why don't you just curse God and die? He'd lost all the things that he had to do business with, his commerce, all those things. But even in that situation, when they didn't recognize him, they didn't go back home. Instead, the Bible says they became like him. They tore their garments, which was an outward form of grief back in those days. They sprinkled dust on their head. Again, an outward form of sadness, an outward form of pain. And then they did the best thing. They sat down with him in his circle of pain. They didn't look at their watch. They didn't do it for just a short period of time. 7 days and 7 nights. They did not speak one word to him, but their presence said it all. And in times of grief, nothing takes the place of your presence. When I was a full-time minister, I had the idea that if somebody thought enough of me to call me at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3:30 in the morning and tell me that their loved one had died in the nursing home or the hospital, or that their loved one had just suffered a severe heart attack and was headed to the hospital, I always thought, if you thought enough of me as your minister to do that, the least I can do is to go and be with you. And I tried to do that. And that means so, so very much. They will never forget the elders, the minister, the Bible class teacher, the regular member that shows up in time of need. In the great book Winnie the Pooh, edited by A.A. Milne, you may recall that Winnie the Pooh goes to visit Rabbit in his burrow. The rabbit offers him some honey. He eats it all, you may recall. And as the story goes, when he tries to get out of the burrow, he gets stuck. It's so tight, as he says, he cannot even sigh. But what does he do? He doesn't call on his friends to come and pull him out of the burrow, but rather to sit outside the burrow, stay with him, read him a story, and offer words of comfort to a bear wedged in great tightness. We can't remove the loss. In some senses, we can't remove the pain. But we can be there with folks, and we can sit there in their pain and show our love and our concern for them. Number 2, say little. It's really not the words, because sometimes we say all the wrong things. The less you say, the better. I am so sorry. I am praying for you will certainly be taken in a proper way. But it's just your presence that means a great deal. A good friend of mine who used to be an elder of the church told about the death of his father, who was a grizzled farmer in that area. He said hundreds of people came on the night of the visitation. And he said, Don, of all the people who came, I only remember what one man said. He came up to me, took me by the hand, and with tears coming down his face, he said 4 words, I am so sorry. But of all the people who said things that night, he's the only one. Say little. Number 3, do much. 1 John chapter 3, verse 18 says, not just in words, but in deeds and in truth. If you have something ready to write, I want to give you a list of 22 things that people over the last years have said helped them in those first few days and those first few weeks in regards to helping them in their grief journey. Number 1, make phone calls for them. If the loss especially was sudden and unanticipated, they're in shock. It's going to be hard for them to even imagine their phone number, much less calling someone else. And so it may well be that they need you to take their phone, or for them, you make a list of the people that they need you to call to let them know. That will mean so, so very much. Number 2, keep small babies during the time of the funeral visitation. If the funeral visitation is here at this building, and you have a large family that have little babies or little children, as the case may be, you come to that visitation with their permission and say, now listen, after being here for just a little while, I'm going to take Janie and I'm going to take little Dougie to our house, and you come pick them up when you're finished at the end of the night. That way they can properly visit with people without wondering where Janie or Dougie are. And that will mean a great, great deal, especially on that particular night. Number 3, the offer to keep out-of-town guests might be offered, because a lot of times people come, but they don't have the money or the funds, or maybe because of COVID, there's restrictions. And so maybe the offer just to give them a room that they can stay when they're coming to be a part of a funeral situation. Number 4, ladies. Have ladies check the food in that's being brought to the particular home. If it's being brought to the home rather than to the church building, need to keep up with what this person brought, and especially the dish. The word companion means literally the idea, come with bread. It was the idea that people many years ago, and some of the older people here certainly understand this more than others, that you were expected and also had the benefit of taking your dish of food in the very best dish that you had, with the idea that a couple of weeks later you're going to get it back. But that was what people did, especially out in the country. This can be very, very helpful to know what dish belongs to this person, and that can be helpful in that manner. Number 5, the offer to sew buttons or to pick up clothes at the cleaners. I had somebody tell me that the day of the funeral, there was a button that was off. She said, for the life of me, I could have never sewn it on. But here came so-and-so, and she did it in 5 minutes. Little things like that can mean a great deal. Fellas, here's one for you, number 6. Take the car being used for the funeral procession and go get it washed or cleaned. Or perhaps if it's going out of town for a long trip, change the oil and maybe put some gas in it. Years ago, one of our deacons had a mother to die in Florida. It was going to be like a 15-hour journey one way. No way that anyone from our area could go, but our elders saw the need for that car to be taken, oil changed, washed and cleaned, and a new tank of gas to put in it. Just letting them say, we're thinking about you, even in the long trip that you take, and we're trying to help out in the way that we can. Number 7, there may be the offer to stay with the deceased. I had that situation happen on one occasion. Father died somewhat suddenly in the hospital. The family needed to go make arrangements, tell them, get the news out. They didn't want to leave Daddy alone. I was there. I said, would you like for me to stay with him? Would you do that? I said, yes. Stayed about an hour and a half before the coroner came. It seemed to be helpful to them. That might be something that you can do. Number 8, the offer to stay at the home, especially during the time of the funeral. I don't know about you, but in our section of Alabama, there have been times when someone especially has been out in the country, and sometimes the funeral homes would put up the signs, slow down because of, funeral ahead. And there have been vandalism. A preacher that some of you would know, on the day of his funeral, on one of the main thoroughfares in Florence, Alabama, they broke into that house and robbed that family during the time of the funeral. Insult to injury. So maybe the offer to stay at the home might be appreciated. Number 9, give rolls of quarters or tokens. Ron mentioned that at the hospital. That might be helpful to people because it's not a time to be making change where they're in and out thinking about their loved one that is sick. Number 10, ladies, there may be an offer or the need to clean the home. Let's say that perhaps a person is at a hospital in Atlanta when they pass away and the family's been camped out up there for days, perhaps weeks, and the person passes away, and yet eventually they're going to be coming back to the home. With their permission, go into that home and clean it and get it ready to receive company. That would mean a great, great deal to others. Men, number 11, mow the grass. During the summer when it's growing, they want things to look presentable. People are coming in, but that's just something that a person could easily do that would mean a great deal so that they don't have to worry about that. Number 12, offer to help with thank you cards and the buying of stamps after the fact. For some, that's just really, really hard to do as they write down their thoughts concerning their appreciation to you. And so offering to help them with that might mean a great, great deal. Number 13, take toilet paper and other paper products, forks and spoons. A lot of eating is going to be going on if they're at the home, and yet that's something that they don't have to worry about, washing of dishes, because you've taken that big box of those things to them. With that, number 14, are Rubbermaid containers that can be used for leftovers. Typically, there's a whole lot of food, and eventually they need to take those dishes back, and so they can still use that food by just giving Rubbermaid containers or whatever the case may be. Help with that. Number 15, they may need you to help pick out the clothes that will be worn on the day of the funeral. Some people, again, the shock and numbness of the death is just too much. And so somebody giving the help to do something of that nature, or maybe even offering to do the person's hair. I've known of that situation being appreciated by people who had the ability to do that. Number 16, they may need help with getting the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren dressed for the funeral. It's all they can do to get their clothes on, much less the little ones. And so with their permission, that might be something that you could easily do. Number 17, help with the paperwork after the death. You know, you have to deliver those death certificates to all the different agencies and whatever. Ask them. Don't say, if I can help you, let me know. You put the burden on yourself and say, in a few days, I'd like to come with your permission and take you wherever you need to go. If you need to go to get medicine, let me be your driver. If you need to go and deliver those certificates, let me take you back and forth. Something like that might mean a great, great deal, especially in those first few days. Number 18, we mentioned this earlier. Pray over the phone with these people. Maybe because of COVID or relative restrictions or the distance involved, but letting them know that you're thinking about them will mean a great, great deal. Number 19, yard work after the funeral. Just because the funeral is over, grass is still going to grow. There's shrubs that still may need to be cut, and this may be an elderly person, and they're on limited income. And that's just something that men could do, young men could do. A lady up the road from where I live mentioned this thought. Her husband had suddenly died, and she said that meant a great deal, that somebody still saw that the shrubs were growing and that there was need to help in the yard, and they were willing to do that. Number 20, this same lady made this statement as well. Somebody helped in transporting my children after the funeral to practices and to appointments. This lady had one son. The father now was dead. And she said, I didn't know about basketball practices and football practices and band things. And here I was myself, in the throes of grief. And she said how comforting it was that there were people on his team that offered to come and pick him up, take him to the practices, and then bring him back. And she said that really made me feel better. And little things like that can mean a great deal. Number 21, ladies and men perhaps, ask to use the recipes of that loved one that passed away and bring them that food maybe at an appropriate time. Maybe that lady was known for a special dessert or a special casserole. It might be too hard on the day of the funeral to eat their loved one's casserole, but maybe later on down the road, that would lift up that memory so very much. And so with permission, ask for that and then perhaps do that. And then number 22, if you're technologically able to do this, take the pictures that are going to be used of the slideshow of the deceased and their families and make a PowerPoint out of that for the funeral or for the visitation. Those are things that have been done that others have suggested would be very, very helpful. Number 4, be alert. Be alert to minor things that perhaps become major. Maybe you need to iron the clothes that are going to be worn the day of the funeral. A friend of mine who lost her husband suddenly said, "We decided to eat at home rather than go to the church after the funeral." When we got to the home after the funeral, a Christian lady had come in, had got all the food out, had got it all warmed up, had it on the table, had tea in the glasses. Everything was ready. All we needed to do was sit down and pray and eat. And she left. And an hour and a half later, she came back and cleaned it all up by herself. She said, "I will never forget that woman on that particular day with all the trauma and all the emotions of the day, being a Martha and a Mary, if you will, and helping out in that particular way." So be thinking about things of that nature. The late Brother Brad Brumley, who was part of the administration at Free Hardeman University, tells a story of a family that in one day's time lost in a car accident the father, who was the patriarch of the family, his adult son, and his son. 3 generations wiped out in one car accident. 2 days later, the neighbor near that family came to the door, knocked on the door, asked for the matriarch to come to the door, expressed his profound sympathy and sorrow over the loss of all those men and boy, and then said, "Will you be willing to share with me the shoes that will be worn the day of the funeral? I want to polish them." And that's exactly what he did. A little thing? Maybe. You think they ever forgot it? Not at all. Why? Because it was the timing, and it was the care and the love. He couldn't replace what had happened, but he could say, "We care for you," by such an act like that. Number 5 is food. Food's a way to show our love and care and concern for family, and we often give it to them before the funeral, but what about after the funeral? What about times in which that family still may need help, especially if there are children involved, especially if by chance it was the death of the wife or the mother? I know the congregations that have committees that will set up a time where they make an appointment with that grieving family that on one night during the week for X number of weeks, they're going to bring a hot meal to that family. We had a friend in Delaware who lost his wife somewhat young in life with his 2 children. He said that church, Don, for 1 year brought food every Tuesday night. How important that was. Not only the food, but just getting to see different people and be able to visit with them and let their children know that the church cared. And that means a whole lot. Number 6, mark your calendar. Mark your calendar. Remember to go and visit the loved ones, not before the funeral only, not the day of the funeral, but in time to come. Ron mentioned that a lot of people forget, folks, 2 weeks after the funeral. We mark our calendar and we put down the time that we're going to go and see them and remember them 2 or 3 weeks after the fact. Psalm 142 verse 4 that we looked at this morning makes the statement, "I looked on my right hand and beheld, but there was no man that would know me. Refuge failed me. No man cared for my soul." We don't want that to happen. And so we need to be sure that we remember them, that they know that we are with them in the long haul, whether it's the valley or whether it's the mountaintops in terms of their grief. Number 7, remember special days, like the first holidays that the families will have to endure that without their loved one, the birthday of the deceased. Remember the date of the anniversary, if that's the case. These are all hard days for them to remember. Just a card or just a text or just a phone call letting them know that this is coming up and that you're thinking about them. You see, they're not going to forget their loved ones. They're afraid that we are. And those people were notable and are notable. Part of this church, those people were who passed away. And so lifting up those memories and letting them know. Mother's Day, we had a couple in our grief class that had a lady who was a part of our grief class that had lost her husband. And every year before Valentine's Day, he would send her a dozen roses. He died. And the next year, right before Valentine's Day, that couple sent a dozen roses to that woman, letting them know that they had not forgotten and that they couldn't take the place of the husband, but they could show their love for her by sending those roses. When they come to church, don't let them sit alone. Sit with them. Invite them to sit with you, or you go and sit with them, because that often is very, very hard to do. Number 8, memorial. Mark the event of the funeral with respect. If the funeral's here at the building, let the men take turns waiting on the family, ushering the people in, having water or chairs down front, because it gets hard sometimes for them to stand all that time. If you knew the deceased well, write a letter to that family, letting them know what that person meant and means to you. If perhaps it was an aged person and there are grandchildren or great-grandchildren that didn't have the ability to know that great-granddaddy very long, write a letter and give it to the family that one day they can give to that great-grandson about what made their great-granddaddy so special. That letter will mean a great deal in time to come. So, memorialize and honor them. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4 talks about Abel, that though he was dead, yet still he speaks. There have been people, no doubt, that have died that was a part of this congregation, and yet their good works continue to follow them. And we need to lift that up. Number 9, listen carefully. Real friends will give their grieving friends the permission to grieve and to talk in their presence, even if they truly don't understand everything about it. You show that you care by being able to listen. Typically, the rule of thumb is that it's okay to mention the loved ones by name when you are talking to them. If it's too painful, they'll let you know. But in most cases, it may have been a long time since someone has mentioned their deceased by name. Nancy Williams puts it this way: the mention of my child's name may bring tears to my eyes, but it never fails to bring music to my ears. If you're really my friend, please don't keep me from hearing the beautiful music. It soothes my broken heart and fills my soul with love. In connection with this, Doug Manning says there are 3 words beginning with the letter H that we would do well to remember. First of all, hush. Just listen. Secondly, hug them. COVID's made that a little bit harder, but we can still show our love and concern. And thirdly, hang in there with them. The late Brother Marshall Keeble, great black evangelist, would often do revivals, and he would bring some of his preacher students, his young preacher boys, into the service. And they would stand and preach for about 5 minutes or so, maybe a couple of them, before he would get up and preach for an hour or even longer, as the case might have been. As the story goes, one of those preacher boys had grown up and now was a full-fledged minister and was a minister of a congregation. And one day called up Brother Keeble and said, "Brother Keeble, I have a problem." He said, "Son, what's that?" The cistern, he called them that. The cistern. They just keep on hugging on me. What do I do? He said, "Son, do as I do." He said, "What's that?" Stand still till they're through. It's important that we listen and that we show our love and care and concern for people who are hurting. And then number 10, make sure that the church feels like a family to those who are hurting. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he likens the church to a body. And he talks about how that the bodies all have importance, and that what might be considered as least valuable is really so important regardless. And then he says in verse 25, there shouldn't be any division in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. If one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. And then he says, you are the body of Christ, and members in particular. People need to understand that in times of need, the Gadsden Church of Christ is available. Hopefully folks who are watching this online have gained by being a part of this, and I hope that they go away with a better idea of who you are, and they'll be willing to reach out to you in times of need. We mentioned at the outset this morning in the first session that we don't forget the forgotten grievers, the little children, because sometimes we do. Years ago, someone sent me this poem written from a child's point of view entitled, Is Heaven in the Yellow Pages? Mommy went to heaven, but I need her here today. My tummy hurts and I fell down. I need her right away. Operator, can you tell me how to find her in this book? Is heaven in the yellow part? I don't know where to look. I think my daddy needs her too. At night I hear him cry. I hear him call her name sometimes, but I really don't know why. Maybe if I call her, she'll hurry home to me. Is heaven very far away? Is it across the sea? She's been gone a long, long time. She needs to come home now. I really need to reach her, but I simply don't know how. Help me find the number, please. Is it listed under heaven? I can't read these big, big words. I'm only 7. I'm sorry, operator. I did not mean to make you cry. Is your tummy hurting too, or is there something in your eye? If I call my church, maybe they will know. Mommy said that when we need help, that's where we should go. I found the number to my church tacked up on the wall. Thank you, operator. I'll give my church a call. My hope is that folks here in this area will remember the Gadsden Church of Christ in time of need, and that they will show their care and concern for you by asking you to lift them up and to help them in their time of need. You've been so kind in your attention and your kind words, and we appreciate so very much the opportunity to be here. If we could ever be of help to you, feel free to call upon us. And at this time, we'll have the devotional.